Hey, it's Sean with a pre-show disclaimer. Before this episode posts, you will know that Vince Carter is having his number retired by the Toronto Raptors, broken by Josh Lewenberg on Monday, moments after the recording of today's podcast. Very convenient. Thank you, Josh. We will talk about this more on Tuesday's podcast. Of course, I think we've talked about a lot. You can go listen to our thoughts on Vince Carter and retiring his number last week on Wednesday's podcast with Katie Heindel. We'll get into it more on Tuesday's show with Jamar Hines. But for now, enjoy today's podcast with Viac Jacob, where we talk about Bruce Brown's injury and assembling the opening night rotation. Thanks for hanging. Enjoy. On your Monday episode of Locked On Raptors, Bruce Brown is having surgery. That seems not ideal. Plus, we bust out our 2K minute sliders and decide how are the 240 minutes on opening night going to be allocated to your Toronto Raptors?
You are Locked On Raptors, your daily Toronto Raptors podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's going on? And welcome to another episode of Locked On Raptors, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Monday, September the 23rd. We are 1 week away from Media Day, and I am your host, Sean Woodley. I've been covering the Toronto Raptors now for going on 11 seasons on various platforms. You can find all my work over on the Hell website at Woodley Sean. You can find the show on Instagram at Locked On Raptors, and you can join us, as always, in the Locked On Raptors Discord server, where today it's a buzz with the reaction to Fantasy League winner Josh and his beautiful creation. Yes, Josh created a Locked On Raptors Fantasy League trophy, and it rocks. It's going to be shipped around for years, decades to come to the winner of the Locked On Raptors Fantasy League. It's very cool, very awesome. Come join us in the Discord to be part of our awesome community with people like Josh. It's wonderful. Of course, you can find the show for free wherever you get your podcasts. Follow, subscribe, rate, review, tell a friend. Much appreciated when you support the show, however you support the show, whether it's on the audio or video side of things. And today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. Place your $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. And we will get started here on a show where we got lots to get to. We got some breaking news from, Friday, after I recorded Friday's podcast. And we've got some looking ahead to opening night for your Toronto Raptors, and we're going to do it all with our pal Viac Jacob, who's here to talk about Bruce Brown's injury and assembling the Raptors opening night rotation. Big V, how the hell are you, my friend? You've muted yourself, sir.
You did that.
I did not do that.
The host is unmuted. You did that. You totally did that at the start.
I didn't do that.
All right. We can check the tape. I am excited, man. As you said, a week away from Media Day and then getting into training camp. So I'm excited for this episode, talking about the rotation minutes. And yeah, man, starting to feel it.
Yeah, certainly really excited to watch some basketball that feels like it matters. Even if the Raptors aren't going to be all that great this season, it feels like they're going to play, functional, normal basketball, which has been quite a while since we saw any of that here in these parts. Before we get into assembling the opening night rotation for this team, we should talk about a guy whose surgery is going to impact the opening night rotation for this team. Friday, as I was posting Friday's podcast, news comes down that Bruce Brown is having arthroscopic knee surgery. He'll be reevaluated in 3 weeks. Typically these types of things, I don't know, you kind of go through the history annals. Jeff Stotts from In Plain Clothes or In Street Clothes is a really great injury guy. 4 to 8 weeks, kind of the timeline for something like this. We'll see what the reevaluation in 3 weeks says, but Bruce Brown not going to be available for at least the start of the season. One would think it's going to take him a bit of time to ramp up one way or another. There was all kinds of reaction to this on Raptors internet after this happened. A lot of placing blame at the medical staff. Why wasn't the surgery done sooner? That's dumb. Look, guys probably, I think, most cases want to avoid surgery. Yes, Bruce Brown had a knee thing last year. The assumption for me, at least, without, again, knowing anything, is he probably wanted to rehab and recover without surgery, and getting close to the season, things aren't getting better. Okay, let's do the surgery now while there's still time and we still get to actually play basketball this season. That's my read on the situation. But of course, people love to get mad about things and place blame over injuries, which is very stupid and weird. Big V, what were your sort of big first impulses, first reactions to the Bruce Brown injury news?
Yeah, I mean, I think similar to you, I was probably thinking, hey, he went into the offseason saying, let's see if this can improve naturally and whatever. And maybe he went through some processes where it's like, oh, okay, this feels pretty good or whatever, going and playing in some runs and doing stuff and probably feeling like, okay, things are headed in the right direction. And then maybe now, with training camp coming near, he's ramped things up and all of a sudden maybe felt something, right?
Mhm.
And it's like, oh, okay, this doesn't feel right. And then was like, okay, you know what? Let's just take care of whatever needs to be taken care of and then move forward. So
Yeah.
that was kind of my read. That was kind of my thinking. Um, yeah, to your point, like people do want to sometimes see the worst, and like especially in a situation like Bruce's where everyone's anticipating a trade, it's like
Mhm.
everyone's ready to move
But
on.
what about his trade
Oh.
value? Oh my God.
So yeah, that was my read of it.
Yeah, I think, yeah, the trade element of all of this makes it just a little like it opens itself up to more sort of weird responses and weird reactions to this type of thing. Like, guys get hurt all the time. This is not like new. This is the NBA. Like, you're never going to go through a season without a guy missing a couple weeks. Like, it just happens. And so if it's going to happen at the start of the season for Bruce Brown and he's going to be all right after that, then I think that's great. I would rather him be hurt in October, November than hurt in January, February when the trade deadline's bearing down, right? I don't think that people who evaluate players in front offices are going to have their opinion of Bruce Brown changed because he missed 3 weeks at the start of this season or whatever it ends up being. There's a pretty recent history of him being a closing player for a championship winning team. There's a lot of history of him being a very nice role player when the role is sort of suited to his skills and the talent on the roster is there to optimize him. I don't think that's changed at all. I don't think that will change. Front offices are not that short-sighted and stupid. I think that there's some on-court implications for other guys on the roster that are really interesting with Bruce Brown. I don't think this tangibly, look, he doesn't have a ton of trade value right now, obviously. If he did, he would have been traded by now. I don't think this doesn't change that all that much. I think if he plays basketball from mid-November on, he has a chance to rehab his value and the Raptors can get something for him at the deadline. Whether that something is great, I don't know, probably not. But, I think there's this other sort of element too that people look at Bruce Brown as like the last chance to save the Pascal Siakam trade. That's just a lost cause. You're not saving that trade no matter what you get back for Bruce Brown. It's a bad, dumb trade that sucks and it's not changing. And so, you can view the Bruce Brown trade thing independent of that trade, I think, and make yourself feel a whole lot better. Let's talk about the actual on-court implications for this team, because there are some. Bruce Brown figured to be like the 6th or 7th man on this team coming in. He'll surely take up that role at some point, but who do you think is the most impacted? Who do you think has maybe the most opportunity opened up? Someone on the team who has like a sort of new lease on this season based on Bruce Brown not being available for the start.
Yeah, so I think in terms of players it impacts, I would probably go with uh Jacoby Walter,
Okay.
having a window to more minutes. I think if there was any type of conversation of, hey, do you go with Gradey? Do you go with Bruce? I think it's pretty damn
Grady's
clear.
starting now. Yes.
Yeah. I think, you know, obviously last season we saw Chris Boucher get cut out of the rotation. Maybe there's a bit of an opportunity for him to sneak in there.
Mhm.
Don't know what that situation looks like. Ochai Agbaji, maybe there's a bit of an opportunity for him. So those are the guys I think that are probably most in line for minutes as a result of Bruce. I don't know where you're at with that.
Yeah, I'm pretty much with you. I think there's a chance we see some Walter up front, and maybe we kind of get like the Gradey Dick arc from last year, where starts the season out and kind of realizes, okay, this is what I need to improve upon to really kind of hang in the NBA. Goes, takes a tour through the G League, lifts some weights, and then comes back and maybe plays near the end of the year. I think the guy it really is interesting for is Ochai Agbaji. Like I've said that before, but there's a lot of competition for the position he plays, and there's a very real chance that the first month or two of this season are his last chance to stick in the NBA long term. We'll see what they do with this option on Halloween. Right now, I think it'd be pretty silly to pick up that option based on what we've seen from Ochai Agbaji so far as a Raptor in Summer League and frankly during his time with the Utah Jazz. I'm not sure you want to be committing to his salary for next season as of October the 31st this year. I don't see how much upside there is to picking up that option. But maybe he shows out in preseason and there's something there. He's going to have a chance now with no Bruce Brown soaking up those minutes at the 2. I think the other guy that this kind of sneakily impacts and puts a kind of a spotlight on is Davion Mitchell, because I think now it's pretty clear Mitchell is going to go in with the first crack at being the backup point guard. I think Bruce Brown had a shot to do that and will have a shot to do that once he's back. But I do think there's going to be a couple weeks here at the start of the season where Davion Mitchell is going to kind of have that job. And whether or not he can hang as the backup point guard, setting up the offense, running the show, I think is going to go a long way to determining sort of how he's used for the rest of the season once Bruce Brown gets back. If he flounders in that role, I could see Bruce assuming that job once he's returned, and then Davion becomes more of the off-ball 2 guard that I kind of think he is. Not super hopeful for his backup point guard chops or anything like that. What do you think about Davion's role in all of this and how the Bruce injury affects him?
Yeah, no, that is interesting. I think because I had already penciled him for a decent amount of minutes, I didn't see too much of a change happening. I think
It's more role than minutes, I think.
Yeah. So I think from a role perspective, yeah, you could see, more of the ball handling. You could see more of the playmaking. But overall, I still think he will be more of an off-ball guy. There's still enough guys for the Raptors to be like, okay, Quickly's in charge of the offense. Scotty's in charge of the offense.
Kelly's going to run some stuff.
Of course. Yeah. So I think with that stuff, I do think Davion's role will be okay. And minutes wise, yeah, I kind of haven't penciled in at what I haven't penciled in at. Yeah, obviously it'll be a bit of an uptick with Bruce gone, but too significant, I don't think.
Speaking of penciling guys in for minutes, we're going to get into that coming up in just 1 second. We're going to start our assembling of the Raptors opening night rotation. First with a look at the starting lineup, which I'm pretty sure we both have the same starting 5 projected. We're going to get into how we think those guys are going to have their minutes distributed coming up in just 1 sec. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, the #1 sportsbook in North America. And right now, it's the start of the NFL season. It's still early days. I think we're 3 weeks into the year. I don't know. I don't watch football, but you can start the season with a big return on football on America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Of course, it's not just football you can go throw your money down on. You've got all kinds of sports. You've got the NBA season coming up very soon, the NHL season, the WNBA playoffs are going on right now, baseball playoffs on the horizon as well. And you can throw some money down on who's going to, win an MVP in the NBA, who's going to win the championship, who will win each division, over-unders on wins. All that stuff is there for you to go and peruse over at FanDuel on their super easy to use app. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook and the official sportsbook of the Locked On Podcast Network. Back at it here with Viac Jacob from Sportsnet and Raptors in 7, his Substack newsletter. And we're talking rotations, baby. We're playing 2K. We've got the most fun thing about playing 2K, adjusting minute sliders as you build your rotation. Spend hours and hours doing that crap when I used to play 2K back in the day. And we're going to do that here in real life on the pod. Let's dive into the starting lineup, Big V. Again, seems pretty clear. Scotty Barnes, Emmanuel Quickly, RJ Barrett, Jakob Poeltl, Gradey Dick feel like they're going to be the 5 starters. All the video coming out from Gradey Dick this summer, very exciting. Looking buff, looking spry, looking good. And I just think, the way basketball is played now, having his dynamic shooting, super important for this team. There's not a lot of other shooting on this roster, at least that of that level of dynamism. I think he's got to be in there to give the starters the best shot of being an offensive juggernaut. And, we'll see about the defense. That could be a very much question mark, but that feels like the starting five to me. There will be different positions where these guys soak up minutes in sort of intermediary lineups for sure. But let's talk about the starters. How do you have these minutes divided up, Big V? I kind of have like Barnes, Quickly, Barrett all around 34, 35 minutes. We did have to go in here and try to assemble exactly 240 minutes. So we'll be precise about it. But what you got here for your starting lineup minutes allocation?
Yeah, so pretty much the same as you for Quickly, RJ, and Scotty. I have all three of them at 35. And then with Jakob Poeltl, I have him at 28.
Interesting.
And looking at his history in terms of the minutes he's played, I felt like that was probably a good number to go with. I would like to see him play more minutes. The center rotation would probably demand that, but we haven't seen it yet. And like his career high is 29 in San Antonio. So, so I stuck him at 28. We'll see how that changes when the season starts. And I have Gradey at maybe this is a bit conservative, but I have him at 24 minutes a game.
Okay. So you're conservative on both Poeltl and Gradey. I have them a little bit higher than you. I think my general thing was I don't love a lot of these bench players, so let's just load up these starters as much as we can without it being like a Nick Nurse situation where they're all playing 38 to 42 minutes every night. I don't have that. Again, I have Barnes and Quickly at 35. I have Barrett at 34. And then Poeltl, I have at 31 in a career high nightly minute total. I just think it's all lining up. I talked about this a couple weeks ago when we talked about Jakob Poeltl on this podcast, the two of us. I think it's just out of necessity because there's not a ton of other, options at the five on this roster. There are some who can moonlight for a few minutes here and there, but no sort of tried and true. That's a backup who can take on 15 minutes a night guys on this team. And so I think he's going to be forced to play the most minutes he's ever played. And I also just think the circumstances of the team are going to make it so he is playable in more instances. I think what we saw last year when the Raptors had the weird wingy team and just like the clunkiness in the front court, I think the reason Jakob Poeltl saw himself benched for, closing stretches in some games was just that the fit was weird and that it was just better to have Scotty, Pascal, and OG on the floor together and then figuring out the center rotation just sort of between the three of them as to who was actually playing that position. It just made for better basketball for the Raptors last season. I just think Jakob Poeltl is going to be directly tied to the best basketball this team is capable of playing. And so I think he's going to play more. I think he's going to close more games. I think he's going to close most games, frankly. I don't see many instances where he's not going to close unless they're going super small with like Scotty at the five. And so I just think by that, he's going to play 31 minutes a night. And, in line with that, we're going to see career high numbers from him too, just because he's playing more minutes and he's always been a very consistent per minute guy. And so, I have him at 31 and I have Gradey Dick at 28 minutes. Maybe that's crazy. I know he's only in his second year, but they need what he brings to the table. They need his shooting. They need his cutting. They need his secondary playmaking, or at least the sort of seeds of that he seems to be sprouting right now in his game. I just think he's going to have to be out there to create a good spacing ecosystem for a lot of the Raptors lineups. And so, why not? This season is not about wins. Go throw Gradey Dick to the Wolves, see what he can do. And in 28 minutes a game, I think we see Gradey Dick kind of get comfortable and by the end of the season really establish himself as a no doubt, okay, this guy's going to be a long-term starter in the league type guy. That's how I have it broken down. The starters are going to get heavy run. I think that's good. I think these are the guys you want to see playing the most to go into what I talked about on Friday's podcast, looking at stats to monitor. The on-court net rating of these five guys together or three or four of these guys together is going to be the single most important thing to track this season. And why not give them all kinds of run to get some reps, get some tape, get some actual, sample data that makes sense and is usable for projecting long-term. So that's kind of where I have it for the Raptors starters. Is there a world in which I don't know, could you see them do the thing where they just ratchet these dudes up to 38 minutes just because they're so obviously the best lineup they have? It doesn't feel like that's Darko Rajakovic's MO. It doesn't feel like they're in Nick Nurse win every minute at all costs mode, but could you see that happening if the starters are just so much better than the other lineups?
Over like the long term, no. Could I see it over, a 3 to 5 game stretch? Sure.
Mm.
But
Mhm.
yeah, I would be surprised if that was like the long term vision of the team because you're very much in growth mode. I've said before, I think this is the last season where you have real expectation, don't have real expectations.
Mhm.
And so I do think that will lend towards just like playing it out, learning about young guys, that type of thing.
Mhm. Yeah, I think the only way we see them really get their minutes jacked up is if we get to the late part of the season and they've been a surprise good team throughout the
Right.
first, 2/3 of the year. And then it's like, oh, we're in a playoff battle. Oh, we're actually better than we thought. Okay, let's actually ratchet these guys up. But it requires the other guys on the bench to provide winning basketball for that to really happen in the early going, because I don't think they're going to overtax them early. So yeah, like they're ability to rack up wins early in the season may very much hinge on how much the dudes on the bench can chip in and kind of prop up what I think is going to be a good starting lineup that's going to have a positive net rating. And I think opinions very much vary, or maybe they don't at all, as to how much these bench dudes are going to be able to do that. Speaking of the bench dudes, we're going to get into that coming up in just 1 second, see how we've each allocated our opening night minutes off the bench to various members of the Toronto Raptors. Where did Bruce Brown's minutes go? We'll get to that coming up in just 1 sec. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends over at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the championship is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors is everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back, because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Closing it out here with Big V, Vivek Jacob, as we dig into the Raptors bench rotation, which without Bruce Brown gets, I think, a whole lot more interesting. It kind of felt like Bruce Brown, Kelly Olynyk, Davion Mitchell were going to take up the lion's share of those bench minutes, with probably a ninth or 10th man sprinkled in for 5 to 10 minutes a game. I think with Bruce Brown, things open wide open. Things open wide open. Things become wide open. I don't know. It's Monday. Deal with it. And so I'm curious how you have this broken down, Big V. I don't think I project this bench to be a particular strength of this team. I don't think it's going to be the cavernous black hole that it was for stretches last season either. I think it'll be somewhere in between. I think Kelly Olynyk is a nice stabilizing force who is not as cooked as he seemed at the Olympics. And there could be some surprise youthful performances that kind of pop up and make this feel like a bit more of a potent unit. But again, I think the starters are gonna have to carry the day for this team a lot. Where are you at as far as how you're lining up these bench minutes with Bruce Brown not available? We can get into how Bruce Brown kind of changes that, but when he comes back. But first, let's just start with the guys who will be available presumably on opening night, barring further injury.
Yeah. So to be clear, I did prep my rotation minutes with Bruce Brown. I thought we were doing like at full health type of thing.
Sure.
But I do have a sidebar of what that might look like without him. So
we've done it both differently, which I think makes for great podcasting. So we're good.
So just to quickly cover, I think with Bruce Brown healthy, I had him down for about 23 minutes a night.
Yep.
I think, you factor in, a guy that figures to be the best guy off the bench. And then on top of that, the potential trade. You want other teams to be able to look at him. So I had him there. I had Davion down for 20 minutes a night. I have Kelly at 18, Jacoby at 12, Bruno Fernando at 6, Ochai, Agbaji, and Boucher kind of just like at a couple minutes each. Yeah.
Right. Getting the Norm Powell treatment. Back in the day, the 2 minutes at the end of the first half and never to be seen again. Was that Dwayne
Yeah.
Casey or is that Nick Nurse early days? I can't remember. I think it might have been Dwayne Casey, but yeah,
Yeah.
classic Norman Powell minutes. We love them. I'm pretty close with you on Kelly and Davion Mitchell. I have Olynyk at 23 minutes a game. I have Davion Mitchell at 21 minutes a game. I don't think Mitchell will close many games. There might be the odd one here and there where his defense is really called for against like a guard that's torching the Raptors or something that will come at the expense of the offense. Surely, I'm even less sure that Kelly Olynyk's going to close a lot of games. I thought maybe there would be a world in which he does, but I kind of just think Gradey Dick is going to close games and it's going to be fine. There will be times where Kelly slides in there, I'm sure. But yeah, I think 23 and 21 sounds about right for both guys. I don't have Bruce Brown covered right now. I think the minutes of a few of these guys will get folded into him, and maybe two of them just aren't playing at all. I actually have 11 guys in the opening night rotation right now because I think they'll just like throw stuff at the wall, see what works, give guys a shot. And so I have Bruno Fernando at 7 minutes. I have Chris Boucher at 8 minutes. Those two kind of filling in the backup 5 slot. I think maybe they'll give Boucher another chance to capture the like 2 games worth of magic he found playing with Kelly Olynyk last year before he got hurt and ended his season. I think there will be some opportunity here for Chris Boucher, even if he's clearly not part of the long-term plans for this team. And then I think Ochai Agbaji and Jakob Poeltl kind of split 18 minutes between them, 10 and 8, 9 and 9, whatever it is. I think both guys will get shots. I would guess that Agbaji's minutes start to plummet pretty quickly because I just don't think it's there for him. I feel bad being so anti-Agbaji and just like not buying it at all, but at this point, it's just like a lot of track record of not being a particularly positive NBA player. And so I would rather Jakob Poeltl get those minutes. And I think Walter, just like the movement shooting he brings, the theoretical defense, which I think is going to take many years to sort of refine and form into whatever it's going to be down the line. I just think there's just more that he can offer to sort of juice second units than what Agbaji does, as sort of a guy who stands in the corner and bricks threes. I think that's kind of how I've broken down. When Brown comes back, you're probably seeing Boucher, those minutes cut a little bit. One of Agbaji or Walter probably excised from the rotation entirely. And then we'll see how the Bruno Fernando experiment goes. Maybe he just becomes like a 12 to 15 minute a night backup and everything's fine. I'm not super like positive about that, but he brings good rebounding numbers with him when he's on the floor. He brings good defensive numbers typically when he's on the floor. Not much of an offensive player. I think I've described him as the least graceful offensive player I've ever seen. He's right up there, but he does some stuff to kind of tie things together and I think support Kelly Olynyk in second units that I think we could see Fernando's role increase throughout the season. But for me, Big V, the big thing I keep coming away from looking at these bench lineups is like, there's no way they can play fewer than 2 starters at any time, right? Like it feels like they're going to have to tether. For me, it's like Quickly and Poeltl feel like they should be tethered together. And it also feels to me like Barnes and probably Barrett should be tethered together with Gradey sprinkled into those groups too. Like I think it's A, the way they can be most effective and win the most minutes. And B, I think, again, those 5 guys in the starting lineup are the most important guys to learn stuff about this season. And giving them shots to play with bench guys to see how they prop them up, I think is actually like a good thing in terms of like the long-term investment and the sample gathering and all of that. And so I'm fine if they never have fewer than 2 or 3 starters on the floor at any given time and they sprinkle in these bench guys around them. How would you approach the staggering thing if you were Darko Rajakovic?
So I think you're right about the Quickly and Poeltl being together, part of the stagger. I think there's a debate to be had on whether there's more value because of what the bench guys bring to the table in prioritizing Scotty and Gradey playing together,
Yeah,
as
for sure.
opposed to Scotty and RJ.
Sure. Maybe
Obviously,
RJ, figures into those quickly. Poeltl looks more.
yeah, and I think because I mean, you just go down the line in terms of the bench shooting, right? Like Bruce Brown, Davion Mitchell, like Kelly's the best shooter on there, right?
Yep.
Walter is gonna have to prove himself. Not expecting anything from Agbaji. Boucher might have a hot night here and there. So I think that's where like you could see Gradey. I could see Gradey, being taken out of the game like 5 minutes in so that he can be brought back a little bit later, that type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's where if you get Scotty and Gradey plus the rest of the bench guys, then maybe that can maybe at least keep its head above water. I don't know, but
Mhm.
we'll see what that looks like. Yeah, but I think in terms of functionality, it might be wiser to prioritize that than Scotty and RJ.
That makes perfect sense. Yeah, I think I'm not sure what my appetite is to see like Scotty plus 4 bench guys ever again. That was so bad last season. They got absolutely railroaded. And like Gradey was a big part of those lineups. He'll be a starter this season, most likely. So it's not really Scotty plus 4 bench guys. Grady's a year older, more mature, et cetera, et cetera. But like, I don't know, man. The Scotty as the lead dude with a bunch of guys who are not super high end, it just did not click last season. And I think because of the lack of shooting, maybe there's some lineups where it's like you throw out Scotty with both Walter and Dick, and maybe Olynyk's out there, and you have Davion Mitchell as like a defensive hound, and you have lots of shooting, lots of movement. Maybe that's something that works. I found those like lineups with Bruce Brown and Scotty just never really clicked. It didn't look very good. And there's a lot of Ochai in those lineups, which again is a detractor. I'm curious to see how they play around with Scotty plus 3 or 4 bench guys this season, because they just didn't find success with it at all last season. And I'm curious how much they want to keep going to that to see if they can find something, if anything is to be found. Neither of us mentioned Jonathan Mogbo, which is, I think, interesting because he's one of the only guys on the roster who brings his set of physical dimensions. And I think there's a world in which he does play minutes on this team, maybe even like in place of Boucher or Fernando. Do I see him playing 15 minutes a night as a rookie? Maybe not as much as I would totally love to see that. I'd be all for it. That sounds rad as hell. But do you see a world in which Mogbo kind of finds his way into this mix off the bench sooner rather than later?
I mean, I could definitely see him in there in the second half of the season. I
Sure.
kind of have visions of how the season is going to go, so I could definitely see him in the second half of the season. I think at the start of the season, maybe you get him in before the 905 season begins, and you get his feet wet a little bit and give him a little taste of what NBA action is like, and then I do think he will be spending some time with the 905, and I think obviously the jump shot is going to be such a big part of him being able to stick in the NBA.
Mhm.
You look at his physical prototype, he's probably the best suited guy to guard those big wings.
Mhm.
And so I don't see him as like, I think there's going to be very limited opportunities as a small ball five.
Hmm.
I do think at the NBA, it's going to be more so playing the four. And that's where, can he make enough jumpers to stick at that position is the question.
I actually think I disagree. And I think that there's a world in which Jonathan Mogbo is just the de facto backup center on this team by like December. And that's because it's not because he's doing anything all that special. It's because Bruno Fernando and Chris Boucher just ain't it. And Kelly Olynyk can't play the 5 on his own. And I think Mogbo just becomes the next guy to step into that role. And I think basically everything he does, except for being 6'7" and not 6'11", everything he does screams cool ass small ball 5. Incredible interior scorer, really nice passer. I think he's going to be a really nice short roll weapon as things sort of progress for him in his career. I think like just like the rebounding has always been like a real outlier skill for him. One of the very best rebounders on like a permanent basis in the draft this year. Like I think the stuff he does, he's got a 7'2" wingspan. I think if he were 6'9" even and not 6'7" or 6'6.5" in shoes or without shoes or whatever, like I think we're looking at him a lot more as like a very clear backup 5, like small ball 5 archetype. And like it can work for guys who are not super huge. We've seen it before. It's not common, but I think the dimensions, he's just like a thick dude, good rebounder. Like I said, like I think all the stuff he does screams small ball 5. And because of the lack of like entrenched options ahead of him, I do think there's a very real chance he just becomes the backup 5 on this team. Does that mean they win games? Probably not, but I think we could totally see it by like December. It's like, oh wow, Jonathan Mogbo playing 13 minutes a night and doing a pretty good job as a small ball 5, running, sort of short roll stuff with Emmanuel Quickly and Scotty Barnes and all that. And he's an older prospect, right? I don't think they're going to sort of waste around and sort of stick him in the G League for the full season. I think they're going to kind of throw him out there because he's physically ready for the NBA in a way that a lot of guys coming into the league aren't. I think we could see it. And frankly, I'm rooting for it because it would be awesome to see Jonathan Mogbo playing heavy minutes on this team because I think Jonathan Mogbo rules. But with that, I feel like we can leave it there. Do you have anything you want to promote for the good people out there, Big V, before we get out of here?
Usual stuff. Should have preview stuff on the way for Sportsnet, and then keeping up with Raptors in 7, the newsletter. And besides that, you can follow me on Twitter at Viac Jacob. We will start to crank that thing up again.
Hell yeah, brother. Yeah, so excited to be on Twitter more. Yay! All right, we're going to leave it there. Thank you so much for rocking with the show. We'll be back again tomorrow. Jamar Hines is going to be along. And guess what? We're going to bring back an old favorite. What's more likely? You'll have that to look forward to on Tuesday. All kinds of stuff leading up to Media Day next week. We're less than 2 weeks away from the first preseason game against the Wizards on October the 6th. It's all very exciting, and we will be here to document it with you all the way through the season, every single day. Thank you for rocking with the show. Follow, subscribe, rate, review, tell a friend. We're on audio on all the apps. We're on YouTube. Go subscribe there, and we'll talk to you again on Tuesday with another episode of Locked On Raptors. Thanks for hanging. Bye-bye.